Elara stood at the back of the hall, hidden in the shadow of an oak beam. The ceremony stretched before her like a painting she wasn't meant to touch. Candles flickered along the aisle, white petals scattered across the stone floor. Her sister Mira glowed in a dress that caught the light, laughing softly as she turned toward the man waiting at the altar. Cade. Elara's chest tightened, but she kept her face still. She had practiced this, standing quietly, breathing evenly, letting the moment pass over her without breaking. The officiant's voice rose and fell in familiar rhythm, words about destiny, about the moon's blessing, about mates chosen by forces greater than themselves. Elara's fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. She had heard those words before. She had believed them once. 3 months ago, Cade had found her in the garden behind her family's house. The bond had just snapped into place for both of them the night before, a pull so sudden and undeniable that Elara had barely slept. She had spent the morning imagining what it would mean. A mate. A partner. Someone chosen for her by the goddess herself. But Cade's face had been pale when he approached. His hands shook when he reached for hers. "I feel it," he had said quietly. "The bond. I know you do too." Elara had nodded, hope rising in her throat. "But I love Mira," he continued, and the hope shattered before it could take shape. "I've loved her for 2 years. I can't walk away from that. Not even for this." He had asked her to step aside, to let him choose her sister instead, to keep the bond a secret so Mira could be happy. And Elara, who had spent her whole life trying to make her family proud, had said yes. Now she watched them exchange vows, watched Mira's eyes shine with joy, watched Cade slip a ring onto her sister's finger with steady hands. The pack around her erupted in applause. Elara clapped too, the sound hollow in her own ears. No one turned to look at her. No one noticed the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. She'd become very good at being invisible. The crowd began to shift as Mira and Cade walked back down the aisle together, hands joined, laughter spilling around them. Elara stayed where she was, pressed against the back wall, waiting for the right moment to slip outside. But then the hall doors opened again. A figure stepped through, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of quiet confidence that made people step back without thinking. The noise in the room softened. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Elara felt the shift in the air before she understood why. An Alpha. She didn't recognize him. His dark hair was pulled back, and his coat carried the scent of pine and distant rain. He moved through the crowd with calm purpose, but his eyes were searching. And then they found her. Elara's breath caught. He stopped walking. The room seemed to stop with him. She couldn't look away. His gaze held hers, steady and startling, as if he had been looking for her all along. As if she were the only person in the hall. Her heart stumbled in her chest. She pressed her back harder against the wall, but there was nowhere to go. Nowhere to hide. The Alpha crossed the room in silence. People moved aside without a word. No one spoke. No one interrupted. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the silver threading through the dark of his eyes. Close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him in the cool hall. "What's your name?" he asked softly. His voice was low, careful. It wrapped around her like something she had been missing without knowing. Elara opened her mouth, but no sound came. She glanced past him toward the front of the room where Mira and Cade stood frozen, staring. "Elara?" she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The Alpha's expression shifted. Something like relief. Something like recognition. "Elara," he repeated, as if testing the shape of it. Then he inclined his head slightly. a gesture that felt both respectful and impossibly intimate. "My name is Theron." She knew that name. Everyone did. Alpha of the Northern Territory. Strong, fair, unbonded. "I'm sorry for interrupting," Theron continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "But I had to know." "Know what?" Elara asked, her pulse racing. He hesitated, and in that pause, she saw something vulnerable flicker across his face. "If you felt it too," he said quietly. "The bond." It unfurled inside her chest, like light breaking through a long darkness. Warm. Undeniable. Real. Elara's knees nearly buckled. Behind Theron, the crowd began to murmur. She heard her mother's sharp intake of breath, heard Mira's confused whisper. But Theron didn't turn around. He stayed exactly where he was, watching her with an expression that held no demand. Only question. Only hope. Elara's voice trembled. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what this meant. Theron took a small step back, giving her space. "May I speak with you?" he asked gently. "Somewhere quieter?" Elara looked past him one more time. Saw her sister's wide eyes. Saw Cade's stricken face. Then she looked back at Theron and nodded. Elara followed Theron through the side door of the hall, her legs unsteady beneath her. The cool evening air hit her face as they stepped outside, and she breathed in deeply, trying to ground herself. The noise from the celebration faded behind them. Theron led her a few steps away from the entrance, then turned to face her. He kept a respectful distance, his hands at his sides. "I apologize for the way that happened," he said quietly. "I didn't intend to cause a scene." Elara wrapped her arms around herself. "You didn't know?" "No," he agreed. "I didn't." He paused, his gaze gentle but searching. "But I also couldn't walk away without speaking to you." She looked up at him. The bond hummed softly between them now, a warmth she hadn't felt in months. Not since the night Cade had come to her door and shattered everything. "How long have you felt it?" she asked. Theron's expression shifted, something almost vulnerable crossing his face. "Weeks," he admitted. "At first, I thought I was imagining it. Just a pull toward this territory. A restlessness I couldn't name." He hesitated. "I've been unmated for a long time. I stopped expecting to feel this again." Elara swallowed hard. "Again?" "I had a mate once," Theron said softly. "Years ago. She died before we could complete the bond." The pain in his voice was quiet but unmistakable. Elara felt something twist in her chest, an echo of her own grief meeting his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded, his jaw tightening briefly before he spoke again. "I didn't come here tonight expecting to find you. I came because a friend invited me to the wedding. I almost didn't attend." He met her eyes. "I'm glad I did." Elara didn't know what to say. The bond felt impossibly real now, steady and undeniable. But her heart was still bruised, still uncertain. "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Why now? Why me?" Theron took a careful step closer, not crowding her, just closing some of the space between them. "I don't have all the answers," he said gently. "But I know what I feel, and I know I couldn't leave without asking if you felt it too." Elara closed her eyes. 3 months ago, Cade had stood in her doorway and told her he felt the mate bond. Told her the moon goddess had chosen them, and then, in the same breath, he had asked her to let him go. I felt a bond before, she said, her voice barely audible. With someone else. And he chose my sister instead. When she opened her eyes, Theron's expression had shifted. Understanding settled over his features, followed by something that looked like anger held carefully in check. "The groom?" he said quietly. She nodded. Theron's hands curled into fists at his sides, then slowly relaxed. That must have been unbearable. Elara laughed, a short, bitter sound. It was my sister's happiness. Everyone said it was the right thing to do. It wasn't right for you. The simplicity of his words cracked something open inside her. She felt tears prick her eyes and blink them back. I don't know if I can trust this, she admitted. I don't know if I can trust myself. Theron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was steady and kind. You don't have to decide anything tonight. Elara looked up at him, startled. I mean it, he continued. I'm not asking you to accept the bond right now. I'm not asking you to leave your home or make promises you're not ready for. He held her gaze. I'm only asking if I can see you again, if I can give you time to know me, to decide for yourself what you want. She felt something loosen in her chest, a space opening where there had only been pressure before. You'd wait? She asked. As long as you need, Theron said simply. Elara studied his face. There was no desperation there, no demand. Just patience, just honesty. I don't know how long that might be, she said carefully. Then I'll wait as long as it takes. The bond pulsed softly between them, warm and steady. She felt it settle into her bones, not as a chain, but as an invitation. I need time to think, she said. Of course. Theron inclined his head. May I call on you tomorrow? Just to talk. Elara hesitated, then nodded. I have a cottage on the east edge of the territory, the one with the blue door. I'll find it, he said softly. They stood there for a moment longer, the night air cool around them and the distant sound of music drifting from the hall. Theron didn't move to touch her, didn't press for more. Thank you, Elara said quietly, for asking, for giving me a choice. Something deep and warm flickered in his eyes. You deserve every choice, Elara. He stepped back, gave her one last, steady look, then turned and walked toward the edge of the clearing where the trees began. She watched him go, her heart still racing but no longer only from fear. For the first time in 3 months, she felt something that wasn't grief. She felt hope. Elara woke to pale morning light, filtering through the thin curtains of her cottage. For a moment she lay still, staring at the wooden beams overhead, trying to convince herself the night before had been real. The wedding. Cade and Mira. The stranger with storm-gray eyes. She sat up slowly, wrapping her arms around her knees. The bond still hummed quietly beneath her ribs. Not imagined? Not a dream. Alpha Theron. She'd heard stories about him over the years. A strong leader. Fair. Protective of his people. But the stories had never mentioned the quiet steadiness in his voice, or the way he'd looked at her as though she mattered. Elara pushed the blankets aside and stood, moving to the small window. The forest beyond her cottage was still and calm, the early morning mist clinging to the ground. She wondered if he would really come, if he'd meant what he said about waiting. Part of her wanted to believe him. Another part, the part that still ached from Cade's rejection, whispered that no one waited. Not really. She dressed slowly, pulling on a soft sweater and simple pants, then moved to the kitchen. The motions were familiar. Comforting. Boil water. Steep tea. Try not to think too much. But her mind wouldn't settle. What would she say to him if he came? What did she even want? The question sat heavy in her chest. She'd spent so long trying to be what others needed. The good sister. The selfless packmate. She wasn't sure she knew how to ask herself what she wanted anymore. The knock came just after mid-morning. Soft. Steady. Not demanding. Elara's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She set down her cup and crossed to the door, hesitating only a moment before pulling it open. Theron stood on her small porch, dressed simply in dark trousers and a fitted shirt. He held a cloth-wrapped bundle in one hand and offered her a cautious smile. "Good morning," he said, quietly. "Good morning," Elara replied. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I brought breakfast," Theron said, lifting the bundle slightly. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten." "I hope that's all right." She blinked, surprised by the gesture. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." Elara studied him for a moment. There was no arrogance in his posture, no assumption that she'd invite him in, just quiet offering. She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." Theron entered carefully, as though aware of the trust she was extending. He glanced around the small space, his gaze respectful, then moved to the worn table near the window. "It's not much," Elara said, suddenly self-conscious. The cottage was simple. A single room with a bed in one corner, a kitchen along one wall, and a small sitting area near the hearth. "It's peaceful," Theron said, unwrapping the bundle. Fresh bread, cheese, honey, and sliced fruit appeared on the cloth. "That's worth more than size." Elara moved to the table, sitting across from him. She watched as he broke the bread into even pieces and set one half toward her. "Thank you," she said softly. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The bread was warm and soft, the honey sweet on her tongue. She hadn't realized how little she'd eaten the day before. "How are you feeling?" Theron asked eventually. His tone was gentle, not probing. Elara set down her bread and considered the question. "Confused," she admitted. "I don't know what to do with this." "The bond?" She nodded. Theron leaned back slightly, his gaze steady on hers. "Can I tell you something?" "Please." "I lost my mate 5 years ago," he said quietly. "Her name was Lissa. She died in childbirth. The baby, too." Elara's breath caught. "I'm so sorry." He inclined his head, accepting her sympathy. "For a long time, I didn't think I'd ever feel anything again. The bond broke when she died, and it felt like part of me went with her." Elara's chest tightened. She could hear the weight of old grief in his voice. "I threw myself into leading," Theron continued, "into taking care of my pack. I told myself it was enough, that I didn't need more." "But it wasn't?" Elara asked softly. "No," he said. "It wasn't. I was surviving, not living." He reached across the table, not to touch her, but to rest his hand near hers, close enough to feel the warmth. "When I felt the pull toward this territory," he said, "I didn't understand it at first. I thought maybe it was pack business, a threat I needed to address. But the closer I got, the more I realized it wasn't danger I was feeling. It was hope." Elara looked down at their hands, so close, but not quite touching. The bond pulsed softly between them. "I know you've been hurt," Theron said. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too." She glanced up, surprised. "I am," he admitted. "I'm terrified of losing someone again, of opening myself up and having it ripped away. But I also know I don't want to spend the rest of my life alone, and I don't think you do either." Elara's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to say she was fine on her own, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. Elara's hand trembled slightly on the table. She curled her fingers inward, uncertain whether to reach for his warmth or pull further away. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. Theron didn't move closer. He simply waited, his presence steady and patient. "When Cade rejected the bond," she continued, "he said it was because he loved Mira more. That what we had wasn't enough, wasn't real enough." Her voice cracked slightly. "I keep wondering if there's something wrong with me, if I'm just not someone people choose." "Elara," Theron's voice was low, but it carried weight. "Look at me." She lifted her gaze to meet his. His eyes were dark and serious, but not unkind. "There is nothing wrong with you," he said firmly. "Cade made his choice. That doesn't mean you weren't worthy. It means he chose differently. Those are two separate things." Elara blinked hard against the sting of tears. She'd told herself the same thing countless times over the past 3 months. But hearing it from someone else, from him, made it feel more true. "I felt the bond yesterday," Theron said quietly. "The moment I stepped into that hall. It was like everything in me pulled toward you." He paused, his hands still resting near hers. "I didn't come here expecting that. I didn't even know you existed until I saw you standing there." "Then why me?" Elara asked, her voice barely audible. "Why now?" "I don't know," Theron admitted. "I don't pretend to understand how the moon decides these things. But I know what I felt, and I know I didn't imagine it." Elara swallowed hard. The bond hummed faintly beneath her ribs, warm and insistent. She tried to ignore it last night, tried to convince herself it wasn't real. But sitting here across from him, with the morning light spilling over his face and his honesty laid bare between them, she couldn't deny it any longer. "I feel it too," she said softly. Theron's expression shifted. Not triumph, not relief, just quiet understanding. "Then we take it slow," he said. "No rushing, no expectations, just time." Elara nodded slowly. The fear hadn't disappeared. The doubt still whispered at the edges of her thoughts. But beneath it all, there was something else now. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to trust this." "Neither do I," Theron said. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we figure it out together." His hand shifted slightly on the table, his fingers brushing the edge of hers. Just barely. The touch was feather-light, tentative, but it sent a ripple of warmth through her chest. Elara didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long moment, the silence between them no longer heavy but full. Outside, the village was beginning to stir. She could hear distant voices, the sound of a door closing somewhere down the lane. "Can I ask you something?" Elara said finally. "Anything." "Why did you wait?" she asked. "Yesterday, after you found me, you could have stayed. You could have insisted. But you left." Theron's mouth curved into a faint, almost sad smile. "Because I didn't want you to feel trapped. You'd already been through that once. I wasn't going to do the same thing to you." Elara's chest tightened. She hadn't expected that answer, hadn't expected him to think of her that way. "I wanted you to have space," Theron continued. "To think, to feel whatever you needed to feel without me standing over you." He paused, his gaze steady. "If this bond is real, if we're going to try, it has to be because you want it, not because you feel like you have no choice." Elara's throat ached. She looked down at their hands again, at the way his fingers rested so close to hers. She thought about Cade, about the way he'd come to her 3 months ago with his decision already made, asking her to step aside without ever really asking at all. This was different. Theron was different. "I want to try," she said quietly. Theron's breath released slowly, as though he'd been holding it without realizing. "Yeah?" She nodded. "I'm scared. And I don't know if I'm ready. But I want to try." His hand shifted again, covering hers fully this time. His palm was warm, steady. The bond flared softly between them, not overwhelming, but present. Real. "Then we'll try," Theron said. "One day at a time." Elara let herself feel the warmth of his hand, let herself sit in the quiet certainty of his presence. For the first time in months, the weight in her chest felt a little lighter. She didn't know what would come next. Didn't know if this would work, or if the fear would rise up again and drown her. But sitting here, with Theron's hand covering hers, and the morning light streaming through the window, she thought maybe it was okay not to know. Maybe it was enough just to take the first step. Elara sat alone at her small kitchen table long after Theron had gone. The tea he'd brought her had gone cold in the cup, untouched. Her hands rested flat against the worn wood, palms down, as if she could anchor herself to something solid. The bond hummed quietly at the edge of her awareness. Not loud, not insistent. Just there. She didn't know what to do with it. 3 months ago, she'd felt a different pull. Cade's bond had burned through her like wildfire, sudden and consuming. She'd thought that was what destiny felt like. Inevitable. Undeniable. And then he'd chosen someone else. Elara closed her eyes, willing the memory away. But it came anyway, sharp and unforgiving. Cade standing in the clearing behind her family's house, his expression torn but resolute. The words he'd said. The way he'd looked at her like she was an obstacle instead of a person. "I'm sorry, Elara. I love her. I've always loved her." She'd stood there in silence, unable to speak, unable to breathe. And when he'd walked away, she'd felt the bond between them stretch thin and then snap, leaving only emptiness behind. Now there was a new bond, a new man, a new chance, and all Elara could feel was fear. She rose from the table, pacing the length of the small room. The cottage felt too quiet, too still. Her thoughts were too loud by contrast, circling and circling without resolution. What if this was the same? What if Theron looked at her the way Cade had 3 months from now and told her he'd made a mistake? What if the bond wasn't enough again? What if she wasn't enough? Elara stopped by the window, staring out at the village beyond. The sky was bright now, the morning fully arrived. People moved through the lanes, going about their lives. Normal. Easy. She wondered if any of them had ever felt this lost. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, pale and uncertain. She barely recognized herself. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped feeling like a whole person. She'd become a placeholder, a stepping stone, the one people passed over on their way to something better. Cade had done that to her. But she'd let him. Elara turned away from the window, her chest tight. She didn't want to be that person anymore. Didn't want to feel small and invisible and afraid all the time. But wanting something and believing it were different things. She thought about Theron's words. The way he'd looked at her this morning, steady and patient. The way he'd held her hand and told her they could take it one day at a time. He'd meant it. She believed that much. But belief didn't erase the fear. Didn't quiet the voice in her head that whispered she wasn't worth staying for. Elara sank back into the chair, dropping her face into her hands. Her breathing came shallow and uneven. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. They'd all been spent weeks ago, in the nights after Cade's wedding when she lay awake and tried to understand how she'd become so forgettable. The bond pulsed gently, a soft warmth threading through her chest. She focused on it, just for a moment. Let herself feel it without pushing it away. It didn't burn. It didn't demand. It just existed. Quiet and constant. She wondered if that was what made it different. If that was what Theron had been trying to show her. That this didn't have to be wild and desperate. That maybe real connection felt more like this. Like steady ground beneath uncertain feet. Elara straightened slowly, her hands falling to her lap. She didn't have answers. Didn't know if she could trust this or trust herself. But she'd told Theron she wanted to try. And she had meant it. Even if the fear was louder than the hope right now. She rose again, moving to the sink to wash her face. The cold water helped. Grounded her. She dried her hands on a towel and looked around the cottage. Her space. Her quiet corner of the world. It had felt like a refuge after the wedding. A place to hide, but lately it had started to feel more like a cage. Maybe that was the real question. Not whether Theron would stay, not whether the bond was real, but whether she was brave enough to step outside these walls and risk being hurt again. Elara exhaled slowly, leaning against the counter. She didn't feel brave. Didn't feel ready. But she thought about Theron's hand covering hers. The way he'd looked at her like she mattered. Like her fear didn't make her weak. Maybe bravery wasn't about feeling ready. Maybe it was about choosing to move forward even when everything inside you wanted to stay still. She didn't know if she believed that yet. But she wanted to. Elara moved toward the door, resting her hand on the latch. She didn't open it. Just stood there, feeling the cool metal under her palm. One day at a time, Theron had said. She could do that. Maybe. One day. One breath. One small step at a time. Even if she didn't know where it would lead, Elara woke to the sound of footsteps on the path outside. Her heart kicked hard before she could think. She sat up slowly, the blanket pooling around her waist. The morning light was soft through the curtains. Too early for most visitors. She rose, crossed to the window, and peered out. Theron stood at her door, a small basket in one hand. He looked uncertain, almost hesitant. Nothing like the Alpha, who'd walked calmly through a crowd 2 nights ago. He glanced toward the window and caught her watching. His expression shifted. A small, careful smile. Elara's breath caught. She stepped back from the glass, suddenly aware of her sleep-mussed hair and bare feet. She'd slept in her clothes, too tired to change. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected him. She moved to the door and opened it slowly. The morning air was cool against her skin. Theron stood a respectful distance back, his eyes warm but cautious. He didn't step closer. "I'm sorry for coming so early," he said quietly. "I didn't want to wake you. I thought maybe I'd just leave this." He lifted the basket slightly. Elara's gaze dropped to it, then back to his face. He looked tired, like maybe he hadn't slept much either. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "I know." He paused. "I wanted to." Elara hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." Theron entered slowly, his movements careful and unassuming. He set the basket on the small table near the window. Elara closed the door and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly unsure what to do with her hands. "I brought breakfast," Theron said, glancing at her. "Nothing fancy. Just bread and honey. Some fruit." "Thank you." Elara moved closer, looking into the basket. Everything was simple, thoughtful. She felt something loosen in her chest. "You really didn't have to." "I wanted you to know I meant what I said." His voice was steady, gentle. "That I'm not going anywhere." Elara looked up at him. His eyes held hers. No urgency, no pressure, just quiet sincerity. She didn't know what to say, so she gestured toward the chairs instead. They sat across from each other, the basket between them. Elara tore off a piece of bread, her fingers unsteady. She didn't eat it right away, just held it. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. "Anything." "Why are you being so patient?" Theron leaned back slightly, his gaze distant for a moment. Then he looked at her again. "Because I know what it feels like to be afraid of this." Elara stilled. Something in his tone had shifted. Not harder, just older. Like he was reaching into a place he didn't often touch. "I had a mate once," Theron said quietly. "A long time ago." Alara's breath caught. She set the bread down. Her name was Lissa. His voice was calm, but there was weight beneath it. "We were young. The bond was overwhelming. I thought nothing could touch us." He paused, his jaw tightening briefly before he exhaled. "She died in a border skirmish. It was fast. I didn't get to say goodbye." Elara's chest ached. She didn't speak. Didn't move. "I spent years after that trying to figure out how to keep going," Theron continued. "I threw myself into leading my pack, told myself that was enough, that I'd already had my chance at love, and it was selfish to want more." He looked at her then, and his eyes were soft, honest. "I was so afraid of feeling that again, of losing someone again. I convinced myself I was protecting myself by staying alone." Alara's throat tightened. She understood that. More than she wanted to. "So when I felt this bond," Theron said gently, "when I felt it pull me here, I was terrified." He smiled faintly, almost rueful. "I thought maybe it was a mistake. Or maybe I'd imagined it because I was tired of being alone." "But you came anyway," Elara whispered. "I did." He nodded slowly. "Because I realized something. Staying closed off didn't protect me from pain. It just made sure I'd never feel anything else either." Elara blinked, her vision blurring slightly. She looked down at her hands. His words settled into her like stones dropping into still water. She'd been doing the same thing. Hiding. Telling herself it was safer. "I'm not asking you to let go of your fear," Theron said softly. "I'm just asking you to let me be here while you carry it." A tear slipped down Elara's cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away quickly, but Theron had already seen. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to fix it, he just waited. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You don't have to know yet." She looked at him. His expression was so steady, so kind. It hurt in a way she hadn't expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was real. "I'm scared," she admitted. The words felt too big, too vulnerable. "I know," Theron said gently. "So am I." Elara exhaled shakily. The bond hummed between them. Quiet and warm. Not demanding, just present. She reached for the bread again, tearing off a small piece. This time she ate it. Theron smiled faintly, relief flickering across his face. They sat together in the soft morning light, not saying much, just there. And for the first time in months, Elara didn't feel so alone. Elara was washing the breakfast dishes when she heard the knock. Sharp, deliberate. Not Theron's knock. She dried her hands slowly, her chest tightening before she even opened the door. Mira stood on the porch, arms crossed, her expression hard. Elara's breath caught. She hadn't seen her sister since the wedding. Hadn't expected to. Not so soon. "Mira," she said quietly. Her sister didn't smile, didn't soften. "Can I come in?" Mira's voice was clipped. "Cool." Elara hesitated, then stepped aside. Mira walked past her into the cottage, her gaze sweeping the small space. She stopped near the table where Theron had sat that morning. Her eyes lingered on the second cup still sitting there. "So it's true," Mira said flatly. Elara closed the door. Her hands trembled slightly. "What's true?" "That an Alpha came here. That he claimed you." Elara's jaw tightened. "He didn't claim me. Everyone's talking about it, Elara." Mira turned sharply. Her eyes were bright with something that looked like anger. Or maybe hurt. "Do you have any idea what people are saying?" Elara stood very still. "I didn't ask for this." "Didn't you?" Mira's voice rose slightly. "You stood there at my wedding looking miserable, like you wanted everyone to pity you. And now suddenly an Alpha shows up, and you're the center of attention again." Elara's throat closed. She shook her head slowly. "That's not what happened." "Then what did happen?" Mira demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you couldn't stand that I was happy. That I had something you didn't." The words landed like a slap. Elara's hands clenched at her sides. "You had Cade," she said quietly, "the man who was supposed to be my mate. And I stepped aside because you asked me to." "He loved me," Mira shot back. "Not you. The bond didn't matter. He chose me." "I know." Elara's voice wavered. "I know he did. And I let him go, Mira. I didn't fight. I didn't make it harder for you." Mira's expression twisted. "And now you get an Alpha. Someone stronger. Someone better. Like you were just waiting for an upgrade." Elara's chest ached. She stepped forward, her voice breaking slightly. "Do you really think I wanted any of this?" Mira looked away. Her arms were still crossed tightly. "I don't know what you want anymore." "I wanted my sister," Elara whispered. "I wanted you to be happy, even if it hurt." Mira's jaw clenched. She didn't respond. Elara took a shaky breath. "But I'm done apologizing for existing, Mira. I'm done pretending I'm fine when I'm not. And I'm done letting you make me feel like I did something wrong just by being here." Mira's eyes snapped back to hers. "So that's it? You're just gonna leave with him?" "I don't know yet," Elara said honestly. "But if I do, it's because I'm choosing to. Not because I'm running away. Not because I want to hurt you." "It feels like you are," Mira said, her voice quieter now, almost fragile. Elara's heart twisted. She wanted to reach for her sister, to fix this. But she couldn't. Not if it meant losing herself again. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Elara said softly, "but I can't keep shrinking so you feel safe." Mira flinched. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Something that looked almost like guilt. But then she looked away again, her face hardening. "Fine," Mira said. "Do what you want, but don't expect me to be happy for you." She moved toward the door. Elara's throat burned. "Mira." Her sister paused, her hand on the doorknob. She didn't turn around. "I hope you and Cade are happy," Elara said quietly. "I really do." Mira's shoulders tensed. She didn't respond. She just opened the door and walked out. The sound of it closing echoed through the cottage. Elara stood in the silence, her chest heaving. Her hands were shaking. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't let them fall. She'd said what she needed to say. She'd set a boundary. It hurt. More than she wanted to admit. But it also felt right. She walked slowly to the window and looked out at the forest beyond. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. The sky was clear and bright. Somewhere out there, Theron was waiting. Not pushing. Not demanding. Just there. Elara closed her eyes and let herself breathe. She didn't know what came next. Didn't know if she was brave enough to choose this bond. To trust it. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let fear decide for her anymore. Not fear of being alone. Not fear of her sister's anger. Not even fear of being hurt again. If she left, it would be because she wanted to. And if she stayed, it would be for the same reason. Elara opened her eyes and looked out at the world waiting beyond her door. For the first time in a long time, the choice felt like hers. Elara stood at the edge of the clearing when she heard his footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around. The forest stretched out before her, quiet and green. The air smelled like rain and earth. She'd walked here without thinking, drawn by the need to be somewhere that felt untouched by judgment or memory. Theron's presence settled beside her like warmth against her shoulder. He didn't speak right away, neither did she. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt safe. "I used to come to places like this," Theron said finally. His voice was low, thoughtful. "After she died." Elara glanced at him. His eyes were fixed on the trees ahead. His expression was open in a way she hadn't seen before. "Your mate," she said softly. He nodded. Her name was Iris. Elara's chest tightened. She didn't know what to say. Didn't know if she should say anything at all. Theron drew a slow breath. "We had 5 years together," he said. "She was gentle, kind. She made everything feel lighter." He paused. "When she got sick, I thought I could fix it. Thought my strength would be enough." Elara's throat ached. "It wasn't," Theron said quietly. "And when she was gone, I didn't know how to be anything anymore." He looked down at his hands. "I buried myself in the pack, in being Alpha. I told myself it was enough, that I didn't need anything else." He exhaled slowly. But it wasn't true. Elara's heart twisted. She understood that feeling. The hollowness that came from pretending you were whole. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Theron met her eyes. "I didn't tell you to make you feel sorry for me," he said gently. "I told you because I want you to know I understand." Elara blinked. "Understand what?" "What it feels like to be set aside," Theron said. His gaze held hers. Steady. Honest. To give everything you have and still not be enough. Her breath caught. He stepped a little closer. "You were enough, Elara," he said softly. Cade just couldn't see it. Tears pricked at her eyes. She looked away quickly, trying to blink them back. Theron didn't push. He just waited. Elara swallowed hard. "I don't know if I believe that," she admitted. Her voice wavered. "I keep thinking, maybe there was something I should have done differently. Maybe if I'd been more like Mira." "No," Theron said firmly. She looked at him, startled. His expression was serious now, almost fierce. "You don't need to be more like anyone," he said. "You're not a replacement. You're not second best. You're you." Elara's chest ached. "But he didn't want me," she whispered. "Then he was a fool," Theron said quietly. The words hit her harder than she expected. She felt something crack open inside her, something she'd been holding closed for months. "I was so scared," she said, her voice breaking. "When you said you felt the bond, I was terrified it would happen again. That you'd look at me and realize I wasn't what you thought. Theron's jaw tightened. He reached for her hand slowly, carefully. His fingers brushed hers. I'm scared too, he said. Elara's breath hitched. You are? He nodded. I'm scared of losing someone again, he said. Of letting myself care and having it ripped away. His thumb traced the edge of her palm. But I'm more scared of never trying. Elara felt tears slip down her cheeks. She didn't try to hide them this time. Theron's other hand lifted carefully, his fingers brushing the side of her face. He wiped one of the tears away with his thumb. You don't have to decide anything right now, he said softly. You don't owe me anything. But I want you to know. I see you, Elara. Not as a bond, not as destiny. As you. Her heart twisted. She looked up at him, her vision blurred. I don't know how to trust this, she whispered. I know, Theron said. His voice was so gentle it made her chest ache. But we can figure it out together. If you want to. Elara closed her eyes. She felt the warmth of his hand against her cheek, the steadiness of his presence. She thought about all the ways she'd tried to make herself smaller, quieter, less. And she thought about what it might feel like to stop. I'm tired of being afraid, she said quietly. Theron's hands stilled. Then don't be, he said. Not with me. Elara opened her eyes. She looked at him, really looked at him, at the honesty in his gaze, the patience, the grief he carried that mirrored her own. She thought about the clearing, about the choice she'd made to come here instead of staying locked inside her cottage. She'd already started choosing. I want to try, she said softly. Theron's expression shifted. Relief and something warmer flooded his eyes. Yeah? He asked. She nodded. Yeah. He smiled then. A real smile. Quiet and full of hope. Elara felt her own lips curve in response. It was small. Tentative. But it was hers. Theron's hand slipped from her cheek to cradle the back of her neck gently. Thank you, he whispered. She didn't know what he was thanking her for. For trusting him. For staying. For choosing to try. Maybe all of it. Elara leaned forward slowly and rested her forehead against his. His breath was warm against her skin. She felt the bond hum between them, soft and steady, and for the first time, she didn't fear it. She just let herself feel it. Elara woke the next morning with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in months. The weight on her chest had lifted just enough to let her breathe. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the quiet sounds of the forest outside her cottage. Birdsong filtered through the window. The air smelled like rain and earth. She thought about Theron's words from the night before. His honesty, the way he'd held her hand like it was something precious. She thought about the choice she'd made to try. It still scared her, but it felt right. Elara rose and dressed slowly. She made herself tea and stood by the window, cradling the warm cup in her hands. The morning light was soft and gray. She could see the edge of the pack grounds from here, people moving between cottages. Life carrying on as it always did. She wondered if anyone had noticed her absence at the wedding celebration last night, if they'd seen her leave with Theron. She knew how quickly talk could spread in a pack, how easily truth could twist into something sharper. She was about to sit down when she heard the knock. It was gentle, hesitant. Elara set her cup down and crossed to the door. When she opened it, she found Mira standing on the other side. Her sister looked radiant. Her hair was still styled from the wedding, though a few loose strands framed her face. She wore a pale blue dress and her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were sharp, cold. Elara's stomach tightened. Mira? she said quietly. "Good morning." Mira didn't return the greeting. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Elara moved back instinctively, giving her space. Mira glanced around the cottage, her gaze quick and assessing. "You left early last night," Mira said. Her tone was light, almost casual, but there was an edge beneath it. Elara closed the door slowly. "I did," she said. "I wasn't feeling well." "That's not what I heard." Mira turned to face her, her arms crossed over her chest. "I heard you left with the Alpha." Elara's breath caught. She should have expected this. Should have known word would reach Mira quickly. She kept her voice steady. "I did," she said again. Mira's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "He wanted to speak with me." "About what?" Elara hesitated. She didn't owe Mira an explanation. She knew that. But guilt still tugged at her chest. Old patterns were hard to break. "About the bond," she said softly. Mira's expression hardened. "The bond," she repeated. Her voice was flat. "Of course." Elara stayed quiet. She didn't know what else to say. Mira took a step closer. "You realize how this looks, don't you?" she asked. "You show up at my wedding. You barely speak to anyone. And then you disappear with an Alpha. People are talking, Elara. I didn't mean to." "You never do." Mira's voice cut through hers. "You never mean to. But somehow it always ends up being about you." Elara flinched. The words hit harder than she expected. She looked at her sister and saw anger there. Real anger. And something else. Jealousy, maybe? Or hurt. "That's not fair," Elara said quietly. "Isn't it?" Mira asked. "You had Cade. You could have had him. But you stepped aside. You let me have him. And now you get an Alpha?" Her laugh was bitter. "It's like you can't help it. You just take." Elara felt something crack inside her. She'd spent so long trying to be small, trying not to take up space, trying to make everyone else comfortable. And it still wasn't enough. "I didn't take anything," she said. Her voice was firmer now. "Cade chose you, not me. You were the one he loved. And now you have someone better." Mira's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Someone stronger. More important. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To watch you get everything I wanted?" Elara stared at her. She felt the weight of her sister's words pressing down on her. The accusation. The resentment. She wanted to apologize, to make it better, to fix it. But she couldn't. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Elara said softly. "But I didn't ask for this. I didn't plan it. I was trying to be happy for you, Mira. I was trying to move on. By taking an Alpha? By trying to heal." Elara's voice broke slightly. "I've been hurt too. I've lost things too. And I'm tired of pretending I haven't." Mira's jaw tightened. She looked away, her arms still crossed. "You always do this," she muttered. "You always make yourself the victim." Elara felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not this time. "I'm not a victim," she said, "and I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do wrong." Mira turned back to her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy and painful. "I didn't come here to fight," Mira said finally. Her voice was quieter now, but still edged with hurt. "I came to ask you to be careful. People are talking. They're saying you manipulated the bond, that you knew the Alpha was coming, and you planned it." Elara's chest tightened. "That's not true." "I know." Mira's voice softened just slightly. "But it doesn't matter. People believe what they want to believe. Elara looked at her sister. She saw the girl she'd grown up with. The one she'd protected. The one she'd loved. But she also saw the distance between them now, the way their lives had pulled them apart. "I can't control what people say," Elara said gently, "but I'm not going to hide because of it." Mira held her gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, just once. "Fine," she said. "Just be careful." She turned and walked to the door. Elara watched her go. She wanted to call after her, to bridge the gap, but she didn't know how. Mira paused at the threshold. She glanced back. "Congratulations," she said quietly, "on the bond." Then she was gone. Elara stood alone in the cottage. She felt the ache in her chest, the weight of everything unsaid. But she also felt something else. Clarity. She wasn't responsible for Mira's feelings. She wasn't responsible for what the pack thought. She was only responsible for herself, for her choices, for her healing. And she was choosing to move forward. Elara stood at the border between territories. The morning air was cool and still. The earth beneath her feet felt solid, real. She could see the path ahead, winding through the trees into land she'd never walked. Theron's land. Behind her lay everything she'd known. Her childhood home. The pack that had raised her. The memories, good and painful both. Her sister's wedding. Cade's rejection. The whispers that followed her wherever she went. She'd packed light. One bag. A few clothes. A book her mother had given her years ago. She didn't need much. She wasn't running away. She was choosing to leave. There was a difference. Theron had made the offer 2 days ago. Quietly. Carefully. He'd stood in her cottage and told her she was welcome in his territory. That his pack would accept her. That she could have space. Time. A place to breathe without judgment. He hadn't pressured her. He'd simply said the words and waited. His eyes had been steady. Kind. He'd made it clear the choice was hers alone. She'd spent those 2 days thinking. Walking the familiar paths of her old territory. Sitting by the stream where she used to play as a child. Letting herself feel everything she needed to feel. Grief. Anger. Hurt. Hope. She'd cried more than once. But the tears felt different now. Not helpless, not bitter. Just honest. She thought about Cade. About the bond she'd believed was hers. The future she'd imagined. She'd loved him once. Or thought she had. But now, looking back, she wondered if she'd loved the idea of him more than the reality. The idea of being chosen. Of being enough. He'd chosen Mira instead. And it had hurt. Deeply. But Elara realized now that his choice hadn't diminished her. It had simply revealed the truth. That love couldn't be forced. That destiny wasn't enough on its own. She thought about her sister. The jealousy. The accusations. The distance between them. She didn't know if that distance would ever fully close. But she also knew she couldn't carry Mira's feelings for her. She could only carry her own. She thought about the pack. The whispers. The rumors. The way some looked at her with suspicion. With doubt. She'd spent so long trying to prove herself. Trying to be good enough. Trying to be invisible so she wouldn't cause trouble. But she was tired of that. tired of shrinking, tired of apologizing for things she hadn't done wrong. She thought about Theron, about the way he'd looked at her that first night, the way he'd listened, the way he'd shared his own pain without asking for hers in return. He hadn't demanded anything from her. He'd simply offered presence, patience, a place to heal. She didn't know what the bond between them would become. She didn't know if it was fate or choice or some mixture of both. But she knew one thing clearly. She wanted to find out. Not because the moon goddess had decided it, not because someone else expected it, but because she wanted it. Because when she thought about him, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity, hope, the beginning of trust. She wanted to choose her own path this time, to walk towards something instead of away, to build a life based on her own desires, not someone else's convenience. She deserved that. She knew it now. Deep in her bones. She wasn't overlooked. She wasn't second best. She wasn't the sister who got left behind. She was Elara, a woman who'd been hurt and had survived it, a woman who'd loved and learned from it, a woman who was strong enough to leave what no longer served her, and brave enough to reach for what might. She took a slow breath. She looked down at the invisible line that marked the border. One step, and she'd cross it. One step, and everything would change. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who stood silent at her sister's wedding, the one who tried to be happy for someone else while her own heart broke. That girl was still part of her, but she wasn't all of her. Not anymore. Elara lifted her foot. She placed it across the line. Then the other. She walked forward, into the trees, into the new territory, into the unknown. Her heart beat steadily in her chest. She felt the pull of the bond, faint but present, like a thread tugging gently at her ribs. She didn't fight it. She didn't fear it. She followed it. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. The path curved ahead. The morning light filtered through the leaves. She could hear birds singing somewhere in the distance. The air smelled like pine and earth, and something she couldn't name yet. Something that felt like possibility. She didn't look back. She kept walking, and with each step, she felt a little lighter, a little more whole, a little more certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because someone else had decided it for her, but because she had decided it for herself. And that made all the difference. Elara could see the pack house through the trees before she reached the clearing. It was larger than she'd expected, built from timber and stone, warm and solid against the hillside. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, gray line. The scent of pine and wood smoke mixed with something else. Bread, maybe? Or stew. It smelled like home in a way she hadn't anticipated. She slowed her steps as she approached. Her heart beat steadily, but a whisper of nervousness threaded through her chest. She'd crossed the border. She'd made her choice. But now she had to live it. To meet the people who might become her pack. To step into a life that was still forming in her mind. Theron was waiting at the edge of the clearing. He stood near the tree line, his posture relaxed but attentive. When he saw her, his expression softened. Not surprise. Not relief, just quiet recognition. As if he'd known she would come. As if he'd been certain all along. He didn't move toward her right away. He gave her space. Let her finish the distance on her own terms. When she stopped a few feet from him, he smiled. Not wide, not showy, just warm, genuine. "You came," he said quietly. "I did," she answered. He nodded once, his gaze steady on hers. Then he glanced back toward the pack house. "They're waiting. I told them someone important was arriving today." Elara blinked. "Important?" "To me," Theron said simply. "That makes you important to all of us." Her throat tightened, but not in the way it used to. Not from hurt. From something softer. Something she wasn't used to yet. She followed him toward the house. As they approached, the door opened. A woman stepped out first. Older, with gray streaked through her dark hair and kind eyes. Behind her came others. A younger man with broad shoulders. A girl who couldn't be more than 16, smiling shyly. Then more. 8, maybe 10 in total. They gathered near the door, watching with open curiosity but no hostility. The older woman stepped forward. She looked at Elara with a warmth that reminded her of something she'd lost a long time ago. Belonging. "You must be Elara," the woman said gently. "I'm Marin, second of this pack. Welcome." Elara felt something crack open in her chest. The word welcome landed like a gift she hadn't known she needed. "Thank you," she managed. Marin smiled. "Come inside. You've traveled far. You should rest. Eat." Theron touched Elara's shoulder lightly, just enough to reassure. "No pressure," he murmured. "Take your time." She nodded. Then she stepped forward. Through the door. Into the warmth of the house. Inside, the space was open and comfortable. A fire burned in the hearth. Rugs covered the wooden floor. There were chairs and cushions scattered around, lived in and welcoming. It smelled like bread and herbs and something earthy she couldn't name. Marin gestured toward a seat near the fire. "Sit, I'll bring tea." Elara sat slowly, her legs grateful for the rest. The others drifted in around her, not crowding, but present. She could feel their eyes on her, but not in judgment. In interest. In gentle welcome. The young girl approached, holding a blanket. She offered it shyly. "In case you're cold," she said. Elara took it, wrapping it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said softly. The girl grinned and stepped back. Theron settled into a chair across from her, his posture easy. He didn't speak. He just watched her with that same steady calm. It grounded her, reminded her that she wasn't alone here. Marin returned with tea and set a cup in Elara's hands. The warmth seeped into her palms. She took a sip. Chamomile and honey. Gentle, soothing. "How long have you known Theron?" Marin asked gently, settling into a chair nearby. Elara hesitated. "Not long. A few days." Marin's eyes softened, but long enough to trust him. Elara glanced at Theron. He met her gaze without pushing, without demanding, just waiting. "Yes," Elara said quietly. "Long enough." Marin nodded. "Trust is what matters most here. We don't ask where you came from, only where you want to go." Elara felt her throat tighten again. She wasn't used to this. To being seen without suspicion. To being welcomed without condition. "I don't know where I'm going yet," she admitted. "That's all right," Marin said gently. "You'll figure it out. And we'll be here while you do." The others murmured agreement. Soft words. Kind ones. No one asked her to explain herself. No one demanded proof of her worth. They simply accepted her presence. made space for her. Elara looked around the room, at the faces watching her with warmth instead of doubt, at the fire crackling steadily in the hearth, at Theron, who sat across from her with patient certainty. She felt something shift inside her, not all at once, not like a door slamming open, but slow, steady, like ice melting in spring. For the first time in months, she felt seen. Not as someone's sister, not as someone's rejected mate, not as the woman who'd been set aside, just as Elara, and that was enough. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave her shoulders. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup of tea. She let herself sit in this moment, in this place, in this new beginning. She didn't have all the answers yet. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was exactly where she needed to be. The fire crackled softly in the clearing behind Theron's home. Elara sat on a low stone bench, watching the flames dance against the darkness. The night was cool and still. The stars stretched endlessly above them. Theron had invited her here after dinner, quietly, without expectation, just a simple offer to sit together. She'd said yes. He sat beside her now, close enough that she could feel his warmth, not touching, not pressing, just near. The silence between them felt comfortable, safe. Elara traced the edge of the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Marin had given it to her that first day. She'd kept it ever since. "I've been thinking," Theron said gently. She glanced at him. His profile was steady in the firelight, strong and certain, but his eyes held something softer. "About what?" she asked. He turned to face her. His gaze held hers without wavering, without fear. "About you," he said quietly. "About this." Her heart stuttered. She didn't look away. "What about it?" she whispered. Theron exhaled slowly. His hand rested on the bench between them, close to hers, not quite touching. "I didn't come looking for this," he said. "For you. I thought, after everything I'd lost, that part of my life was over." Elara's throat tightened. She knew what he meant. She'd felt the same. "But then I walked into that wedding," he continued, "and I saw you standing there, and everything shifted." She closed her eyes briefly, remembering that moment, the way he'd looked at her, the way the world had stilled. "I was so lost that day," she admitted. "I know," he said gently. "I could see it, and I wanted to offer you something different, something that didn't ask you to be anything but yourself." She opened her eyes, met his gaze again. "You did," she said softly. "You have." Theron's expression softened further. His hand moved slightly. His fingers brushed against hers. "I need you to know something," he said. She waited. Her pulse quickened. "I'm not perfect," he said quietly. "I've made mistakes. I've lost people. I've been afraid." "So have I," she whispered. "I know." He paused. His thumb traced the edge of her hand, a gentle touch, barely there. "But I want to try. With you. If you'll let me." Elara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Not from sadness. From something warmer, deeper. "Try what?" she asked, though she already knew. Theron's gaze held hers. Steady, honest, full of quiet feeling. To build something real, he said. Not just because of a bond, not just because of fate, but because we choose it, because we want it. Her breath caught. She'd never been offered that before. A choice. Not an obligation. Not a destiny that couldn't be questioned. A real choice. I do want it, she said softly. I'm just scared. So am I, he admitted. That honesty settled something inside her. Made her feel less alone, less fragile. What if I'm not enough? She whispered. Theron shook his head gently. His hand closed around hers, warm and steady. You're already enough, he said. You've always been enough. Elara felt the tears spill over. She didn't try to stop them. Didn't turn away. Theron reached up slowly. He brushed the tears from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was gentle, reverent. I don't need you to be perfect, he said quietly. I just need you to be here, to let me see you, to let me care for you. She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. I want that too, she managed. Theron smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached his eyes, the kind that made her chest ache in the best way. Then let's start there, he said. She exhaled shakily, nodded again. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time, letting her see his intention. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. A question. She answered by closing the distance between them. The kiss was soft, tender, unhurried. His hand cradled her cheek, hers rested against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her palm, steady and strong. When they pulled back, she rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed, her breathing unsteady. I've never felt this before, she whispered. What? He asked gently. Safe, she said. Like I can just be. Theron's thumb traced her jaw, a quiet gesture of affection. You are safe, he said softly. I promise you that. She believed him. For the first time in so long, she let herself believe. They sat together by the fire. His arm eventually wrapped around her shoulders. She leaned into him, let herself rest against his warmth. The flames crackled. The night stretched on. The stars watched quietly above. And Elara felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope, not the fragile, desperate kind, but the steady, grounded kind. The kind that came from being seen, from being chosen, from choosing in return. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if the bond between them would deepen or how long it would take. But she knew this moment was real. This feeling was real, and that was enough. Theron pressed a kiss to the top of her head, a gentle promise. She closed her eyes and let herself stay. Right here, right now, exactly where she belonged. Elara stood at the edge of the gathering clearing. The sun hung low over the trees. Golden light filtered through the leaves. She could hear voices carrying on the breeze. Laughter. Music. The warmth of pack life settling around her like a blanket she'd never known she needed. It had been 3 weeks since she'd arrived at Theron's territory. 3 weeks of quiet mornings and shared meals. Of learning new names and new routines. Of being welcomed by people who smiled when they saw her. Not out of politeness, but because they seemed genuinely glad she was there. She still woke sometimes with the old tightness in her chest, the old questions. But they came less often now, and when they did, Theron was there. steady and patient, never pushing, always present. She wore a soft blue dress today. One of the pack's weavers had given it to her last week. A gift. No strings attached. Just kindness. It still surprised her how much that had meant. Theron appeared beside her, his presence familiar now, comforting. He didn't speak right away, just stood with her, watching the gathering unfold below. "You okay?" he asked after a moment, his voice low and gentle. She nodded, glanced up at him. "I think I am." He studied her face, his gaze warm. "You don't have to stay if it's too much." She smiled, a real smile, one that came easier now. "I want to stay." He reached for her hand, laced his fingers through hers. She squeezed back, let the simple contact ground her. They walked down together, into the clearing, into the gathering. Several people greeted them, called Theron's name, called hers too. She was still getting used to that, to being seen, to being remembered. A young woman named Iris waved from near the fire. She had 2 children clinging to her skirts. Elara had met her a few days ago. She'd been kind, easy to talk to, the kind of person who listened without judgment. "Elara, come sit with us," Iris called. Theron looked at her, a question in his eyes. She nodded. He smiled and let her hand slip from his. She crossed to Iris and sat on the log beside her. The children stared at her with wide, curious eyes. "They're shy today," Iris said with a laugh. "Yesterday they wouldn't stop asking about you." Elara's chest warmed. "Asking what?" "If you were staying, if you teach them to braid flowers like you showed me." Iris grinned. "I told them you'd probably say yes." Elara felt her throat tighten, but not with sadness, with something softer, something like belonging. "I'd be happy to." The children lit up. The smallest one climbed into her lap without hesitation. Elara froze for just a second, then wrapped her arms around the child, held her gently, let herself feel the trust being offered. Theron watched from across the fire, his expression unreadable at first. Then he smiled. A slow, private smile, one meant just for her. She felt her cheeks warm, felt the bond between them hum quietly. Not demanding, just there, a steady thread connecting them. The evening wore on. Food was shared. Stories told. Music played on simple instruments. Elara found herself laughing. Really laughing. Her shoulders loose. Her heart light. At one point, Theron pulled her to her feet, led her into the circle where others were dancing. She hesitated. But he didn't push, just held her hand, moved with her slowly. Let her find the rhythm at her own pace. "You're different now," he said softly, his voice close to her ear. She looked up at him. "Different how?" "Lighter," he said. "Like you're letting yourself breathe." She thought about that. Realized he was right. She had been holding her breath for so long, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to tell her she didn't belong, that she wasn't enough. But no one here had said that. No one here looked at her like she was second best, or a burden, or invisible. "I think I'm starting to believe it," she said quietly. "Believe what?" "That I was never the problem." She swallowed, met his gaze. "That I deserve this, that I deserve to be happy." Theron stopped moving. His hands framed her face, gentle and sure. "You do," he said, his voice rough with emotion. You deserve all of it. She felt tears prick her eyes, but they didn't fall. She just smiled, leaned into his touch, let herself be held. The music continued around them, the fire crackled, the pack carried on. And Elara stood in the center of it all, not on the outside looking in, not forgotten or passed over. She was here, she was seen, she was chosen. And more than that, she had chosen too. She thought briefly of Mira, of Cade, of the life she'd left behind. The pain was still there, faint now, like an old scar, but it didn't define her anymore. It didn't hold her captive. She had walked away. She had chosen herself. And in doing so, she had found something she never expected. Not just a mate, not just a bond, but a home. A place where she could be herself, where she didn't have to shrink or apologize or stay silent. Theron kissed her forehead, a soft promise. She closed her eyes, let herself rest in the moment. She didn't know what the future held. Didn't need to. This was enough. She was enough, and she was finally, truly free.